In a secret realm called Heritage Zero, which was an abandoned village full of fog, night fell. A red-haired woman who was the great disciple of the celestial king of the sword, the older sister of Jie Gang named Hong Yao, who was in her 7th transformation, set foot on top of a rock, and with a serious look she realized that this place was enough to irritate people. She assumed that those awakened with less than 6 transformations could not enter here. In front of her appeared several spirits which noticed her presence and began to approach. Seeing this, she took a leap, firmly grasped the sword, and decided to seek information about Gu Kaishan's apprentice. Just before the spirits could make a move, she began to move at great speed and without much effort cut their bodies in half. In front of her was a tombstone, which was emitting an evil energy similar to Little Nine's poisonous mist. She began to observe the tombstone, and it didn't take long for her to realize that it was the source. She didn't know what kind of entity this tombstone was, as it had an ancient presence from about 100 years ago but still remained very strong. The tombstone had several cracks. She approached and decided to use the information database on relics to search for some information about this tombstone. While her eyes were shining and with one hand she was holding the sword, she landed near the tombstone and gave the system the order to activate divine consciousness. Several system windows with information began to unfold around her. She started to stare at the tombstone and used the total awareness skill called speed reading. Several seconds later, the system fully loaded the information, making a photo of an insect appear. The photo began to fall to the ground, but at that moment she caught it with her hand. She approached the photo, began to look at it, and couldn't help but be shocked and start sweating, as this insect belonged to the mother insect called 9 Miasma Wings, an ancient monster, a strange species born in the extremely dark Jeyu realm, who once caused a great catastrophe which almost led to the end of the world in the 4th century. Luckily now this species was extinct. The entire body of this insect was pure black-purple color with 9 wings on its back. It had a strong venom that could transform into poisonous mist. Its toxicity could corrode everything in the world, including spiritual voids. While the tombstone was surrounded by a powerful evil energy, the moon came out and she thought this was not good since Jiang had a hidden calamity. She decided to tell Master about this as soon as possible. At the same time, in the Tianjiao camp, the beast opened its mouth and prepared to attack. But some time later, its body fell to the ground, and the insects began to devour it. Jiang, who was standing next to it with his hand on his waist, started observing the beast. The insects had devoured a total of 4 beasts. Their devouring value had increased quite a bit. If he got first place in entering camp evaluation, he would be able to complete 2nd transformation very soon. He turned back to where Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao were, reached out his hand to the sky and explained to them that 10 blue flags were more than enough for him to stay in first place. He gave each of them a flag so that at least they could enter the top 10. Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao took the flags, closed their eyes, and with a pleasant smile, they thanked Jiang as they had qualified in this round without doing anything. At the same time, in another part of the camp, Bai Feng and Tan Ying managed to defeat the fierce beast, shaped like an eagle. Now its corpse was lying on the ground. Tan Ying, who was lying on the ground next to the beast's corpse, began to wipe her forehead with her hand, and while she was breathing heavily, she couldn't help but feel happy since they had finally managed to defeat the beast. Bai Feng, who was standing beside, realized that the entrance evaluation for the camp was about to end. He thought that Jiang Wushuang would definitely come in first place. At that moment, the speaker began to sound because the camp entrance evaluation had ended. Those who had advanced to the next round could gather in the square, and those eliminated had to leave the camp within the next 3 minutes, and offenders were going to be punished with death. Zhang began looking at the sky and was somewhat surprised, seeing that the first round had ended. He didn't take long to realize that the 10 fierce beasts that had been released into the camp had been killed. While his body was giving off Little Nine's poisonous mist, he thought that leftovers from beasts were also food. He decided to let out the insects and gave them an order to go look for other fierce beasts and eat everything they could while avoiding people as much as possible. At the same time, the nurses arrived at the camp and began to take away the participants who were injured. On one of the stretchers was Xiao Bai Han, who had lost an arm and had it bandaged. He hadn't died. He was conscious and very angry. He started looking up at the sky, clenched his teeth and felt relieved as he was finally going to be able to leave the camp. He asked Jiang Chen to wait because when he returned home, he would see how his grandfather would punish him. Someone wearing boots stepped onto the stage. This person was none other than Gu Kaishan. He crossed his arms and with a serene look gave orders for all those who had advanced in round to come with him to the Forbidden Zone for next test. Upon hearing this, the participants began to converse among themselves. Gu Kaishan had not mentioned doing the next test in the Forbidden Zone. The 8 great Forbidden Zones of China. Each one was a place with natural treasures, but they were also extremely dangerous places. Although some were afraid, others knew that there was nothing to fear since they had the King of the Celestial Sword to guide them. Some had heard that it was not easy to enter the Forbidden Zones, so they did not know how so many people were going to go. While they were conversing, Gu Kaishan grabbed the handle of the sword and slowly began to unsheath it. While his eyes were shining, he started to stare at them, unsheathed the sword, and began to point at them with the blade. He knew that according to Hang Yao's research, Jiang Chen had the forbidden calamity called 9 Wings of Miasma. He began to look at them and decided to use the celestial sword. Then he started swinging the sword quickly and accurately. Dawn was almost upon them, and the person who was supposed to come would arrive soon. He put his knee on the ground, bent down, threw the sword towards the sky, put his other hand near his face and lowered his head. The participants began looking up at the sky and witnessing this. They couldn't help but be shocked and start wondering what was happening. At that moment, the ground began to shake and several seconds later, it started to break. In the area where they were, it detached from the ground and began to fly. Gu Kaishan decided to prepare in advance, as this was the only way he could overcome the time difference. While rocks were floating around him and his body was surrounded by a powerful energy, he extended his hand to one side and used a technique called Imperial Sword Flight. Upon doing this, his sword came out of the ground, and while it was surrounded by an orange aura, he decided to go to the south of the Jiang River to the Forbidden Zone of Dream Lake. Gradually, the ground began to move towards the mountains. They were amazed to see that this was the strength of Daxia's first king. They couldn't believe that he could move all of Tanjiao's camp. This was something only predecessor Wang Tandao could do in this world. Zhang turned to Luo Sandao and Mu Hankyu and asked them how much they knew about Dream Lake's Forbidden Zone. Both began to look at him with an uncertain gaze. Luo Sandao was not sure, and Mu Hankyu remembered that her grandfather had mentioned it once. The danger level of Dream Lake was very high, and even though it was the least dangerous Forbidden Zone in China, its difficulty did not lie in the hidden threat, but in the distortion of time and space. In addition to this area, there were countless dimensional fragments, portals connected to each other. The space within these dimensional fragments was even larger than the blue planet. These fragments were constantly moving, so it was very easy to get lost and not come out. Zhang approached Mu Hankyu and began to look at her with a calm gaze, realizing that the space within Dream Lake was chaotic. He asked her if the space also affected time. With a serious look, she revealed to him that the time within these spaces was also completely different from outside. It was said that 100 years ago, an ordinary worker entered Dream Lake with the mindset of risking it all. He only needed 2 hours to become a 7 transformation king, but as he himself had said, in reality more than 200 years had passed. Mu Hankyu's grandfather had also explored this place. He had been lost for 3 days after entering, but in reality more than 3 years had already passed in the outside world. Zhang was somewhat surprised, and while a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, he came to the conclusion that the chances of winning or losing at Dream Lake were random. Luo Sandao began to look at him, and she asked him not to worry, since if old man Wang Tandao dared to take them inside, they could be sure that he already knew a safe route. Zhang began to smile and thought that he wished it was as she was saying. This sounded like even though Dream Lake was a dangerous place, it was also a good place. For some strange reason, he felt that Gu Kaishan was doing this because of him. While the sky was starry, Gu Kaishan crossed his arms. Now that Hong Yao had found the calamity of the 9 wings, it was likely that Zhao Zhenggu would soon surpass him, and then this secret would not be able to be hidden. He hoped to gain enough time in Dream Lake to go look for allies. The next day several men arrived at the area where the Tanjiao camp used to be, but now all that remained was a large hole in the ground. They stood on top of a rock and started observing the area. Realizing that the King of Celestial Sword had taken away all of Tanjiao's camp, which is considered as best upcoming generation's camp in their southern war zone, they thought he might have rebelled against them. They didn't know why Commander Duan hadn't arrived yet. At that moment, someone jumped. Commander Duan, who had his arms behind his back, began to quickly move towards them and thought that Gu Kaxin was an old fool. He did not know if he was asking him to bet his life with him. 2 minutes ago, Gu Kaixin sent him a message explaining to Duan that the situation was very urgent. So for this reason he was taking the little ones to the forbidden area for a test. He asked him to continue as usual since he was going to assume all the consequences. Duan approached them, and one of them informed the others that the commander had arrived. Duan, who had his arms behind his back, remained calm, and thought that Gu Kaixin was very careless. Now he had left him. A lot of the men panicked, and one of them explained that they had arrived late. He feared that they were no longer going to be able to reach them. The other man revealed that his son was still up there. If something happened to him, he didn't know what he was going to do. Duan began to approach them, started looking at the ground and fell silent. He passed between them, extended his hand back, and asked them to stop making noise, explaining that Gu Kaixin had said they were going for a selection test and would return the same day, so there was nothing to worry about. Upon hearing, the 2 men couldn't help but be shocked. Duan opened his eyes and began to sweat. With a confused look, he started to wonder if it was really necessary to rush into the forbidden zone for that invincible embryo. He didn't know if he was trying to hide or run away from something. He began to remember what Gu Kaixin had told him, and his expression changed. He couldn't help but be shocked and start wondering if this was about the 9 miasma wings.